Hello everybody, welcome to the fourth episode of CharredBrain's Weekly Thoughts. In this episode, I want to give you an overview of the current lineup of compact Superzoom cameras, also known as Travelzoom cameras. The cameras that I will take a look at in this episode are all released this year. In fact, two of them are not even in stores yet. The cameras are Sony Cybershot HX50V, Panasonic Lumix ZS30 in North America, TZ40 in some European country, and TZ41 in some other European country. Nikon Coolpix S9500, Casio Exilim ZR700, Samsung WB800F, Olympus Stylus SH50, Canon PowerShot SX280, and finally Fujifilm FinePix F900 EXR. Please note that I do not actually own any of these cameras. This is not intended as a review, just as a quick overview. Now, before I look at the cameras, I want to take a quick look at why people probably want those cameras. Travelzoom cameras are pocketable, light, and you can have them always with you. They have a large zoom range despite their size, and that means they are very versatile. They are a very good all-rounder. They are good for travel if you want to travel light and don't want to, for example, carry all your DSLR stuff, and good for everyday use. They are easy to use because of their size. DSLR might look daunting to some people, and also they are comparatively inexpensive. At maximum 400 euro, not more, usually 300. Now, as I've showed you before, there are 8 different Travelzoom cameras from 8 different manufacturers alone released in this year. That means the market is extremely competitive, and that results in a lot of common features shared between those cameras. All of those cameras that I will show you in this episode will have full high-definition video with stereo audio shot at least 30 frames per second, sometimes even 60 frames per second. Almost all of them have more than 20-fold zoom. There's only one exception, the Casio, which nevertheless has an 18-fold zoom. Almost all of them has a 1/2.3-inch CMOS sensor. There's only one exception, the Fujifilm, which has a 1/2-inch CMOS sensor. Almost all of them have equal or more than 16 megapixel. Again, there's only one exception. Surprisingly, it's coming from Canon. The Canon SX280 has only 12 megapixels. Without any exceptions, all of them have 3-inch display. Some of them have touchscreen displays, but still there are buttons beside them, so you are not forced to use the touchscreen exclusively. All of those cameras that I will show you in this episode, and in fact most of the cameras that you can purchase nowadays in store, has an intelligent automatic mode. Some people say smart automatic mode. That means the camera itself do not only set the lighting parameter for you, but also chooses the correct scene mode. Therefore, the cameras are not complicated and extremely easy to use. Also, almost all of them can connect to your smartphone or PC via Wi-Fi, that is, your wireless LAN connection. Some of them even has a GPS unit built in. Even those cameras which don't have a GPS unit built in, since they can connect to your smartphone can tag the photos for you with an app, since most smartphones have a GPS built in. Some of the models even feature a slow motion video capture mode. Those cameras that offer a slow motion video capture mode usually offer 120 frames per second at 640 x 480 resolution. Some might even offer more frames per second but at a lower resolution, which lessens the usability of the video. Some of the cameras also offer full manual mode. That means you can freely set the shutter speed, the aperture, and the light sensitivity all by yourself. Also, one thing that I want to mention specifically is all of those cameras that I will show you in this episode all feature a grip. 2 to 3 years ago, that is not taken for granted. At that time, some compact cameras are just a slippery brick of plastic. you would have great difficulties to hold them with one hand. Luckily, the companies listened, and nowadays most camera will feature a grip of some sort. The first camera that I want to introduce is the Sony Cybershot HX50V. Please apologize, because that is the only camera that I will have to rant about in this episode. So let's get it over with and take a look at its specs. The HX50 has 20 megapixels squeezed onto the regular 1/2.3 inch sensor. Also, this camera features a 30-fold zoom from 24 to 720mm. The aperture goes from 3.5 to 6.3. So Sony increased the number of pixels on the sensor while keeping its size, and also it extended the zoom range. I have never heard of optical aberrations, I have never heard of lens resolution, I have never heard of edge-to-edge sharpness, I have never heard of consistency of the lens performance over the entire zoom range, I have never heard of the noise behavior of the sensor, I have never heard of the relationship between sensor size and the maximum light sensitivity that is still usable. But incredible amount of megapixel and incredible amount of zoom range. That's what Sony is telling me. Although this camera is not available yet, I highly doubt the performance of this camera. If the images from this camera will look any good, if the lens of this camera is useful enough to use the complete zoom range, if the lens of this camera is able to resolve the 20 megapixel of the sensor, if the noise behavior of the sensor will be any good. And why does this camera even has a hot shoe? You know what you can buy for this camera? An electronic viewfinder for only 400 euro. That's right, 400 euro, a viewfinder. I don't believe that anybody would want that on this kind of a camera. The first time I've seen the announcement of the camera, I was completely surprised and speechless, but not in a good way. Not like the announcement of the RX100, which was a very good camera. No. About this camera, I don't know what I should say. Okay, that should be enough rant about this camera. But one thing I have to notice, if the previous generation of Travelzoom cameras has taught us anything, that is, the Sony Travelzoom cameras usually can make extremely high quality videos. And I have no doubt that this camera will also be the same. I fully expect that this camera will deliver one of the highest quality videos that you can find within all of the Travelzoom cameras. Currently, the HX50 costs about 390 euro. But please remember that this camera hasn't hit the store yet. Once it hits the store, I fully expect the camera's price to go down. The next camera will be the Panasonic Lumix ZS30 or TZ40 or TZ41. Panasonic really should unify their naming scheme. Anyway, this camera has an 80 megapixel sensor, a 20-fold zoom ranging from 24mm to 480mm. The aperture goes from 3.3 to 6.4. Looking at the last generation of Superzoom cameras, I also expect that this Lumix will have an extremely high video quality. Also, this camera is extremely versatile. It has GPS, Wi-Fi, slow motion video, various different scene modes, full manual mode, everything what you need, and a lot more. And one small detail that I want to mention is, although it is very hard to verify, but if I'm not mistaken, this is the only Travelzoom camera that has a mechanical aperture. All other Superzoom cameras work with neutral density filter. This camera, this Panasonic Lumix, is the only one with a physical aperture. But I could be wrong since it's very hard to verify. Panasonic has increased the number of pixels on this camera compared to the last generation. But fortunately, Panasonic didn't increase the zoom range, provided that they have optimized the lens and have optimized the image processing. It could turn out that this camera will deliver a better image quality than the last generation Panasonic Lumix Travelzoom camera. But I don't have this camera, so I cannot judge the image quality of this camera. Nevertheless, it should be good enough for almost any use. This camera costs currently about €330 and is currently available. Next camera is the Nikon Coolpix S9500. This camera also has an 18 megapixel sensor, a 22-fold zoom ranging from 25mm to 550mm. The aperture goes from 3.4 to 6.3. Compared to the last generation of Nikon's Travelzoom cameras, Nikon increased both the number of pixels on the sensor and the zoom range. Apart from that, I couldn't find anything special about this camera, so yeah, nothing extremely extraordinary about this camera, but it's also very feature complete. It has everything that you need. Currently it's available for €280. Next we have the Casio Exilim ZR700. This camera has a 16 megapixel sensor and an 18-fold zoom ranging from 25mm to 450mm. The aperture going from 3.5 to 5.9. This camera is focused on high speed. It can capture a full resolution image with 30 frames per second. More impressively, it can capture 1000 frames per second slow motion video. But the resolution of that video is so low that the usability is rather questionable. At a more usable resolution, the 640x480 resolution, it can capture that at 120 frames per second, just like any Travelzoom cameras that offer a slow motion mode. Casio advertises that this camera is in general extremely quick at use, quick at taking photos and shooting videos. But I doubt that other cameras will be much more slower than this Casio Exilim. But if you really need the 30 frames per second full resolution photos, for example for sports photography, this camera might be something for you if you do not want to have an expensive and large DSLR system. For only €250 currently at store available, this camera is also not very expensive. But this is not the currently cheapest Travelzoom cameras available. It is the Samsung WB800F. It also has a 16 megapixel sensor, and to my surprise, the cheapest camera of those 8 also has the widest and the brightest lens. The lens starts at 23mm and goes to 483mm, makes it a 21-fold zoom. At wide angle, this lens offers a 2.8 aperture, which makes this lens the brightest lens compared to all other cameras. At the maximum zoom, it still offers a 5.9 aperture, which is indeed far from optimal, but still not worst. Currently, this Samsung is available for €210. So if you want a cheap Travelzoom camera, this camera could be something for you. Next we have the Olympus Stylus SH50. It has a 16 megapixel sensor and a 24-fold zoom, ranging from 25mm to 600mm. The aperture goes from 3.0 to 6.9. This camera emphasizes on its 5-axis image and video stabilizer. Although the 5-axis stabilizer is very unique and new, unfortunately Olympus is not the only one with a 5-axis stabilizer on its Travelzoom camera. In fact, Panasonic also has a very similar 5-axis stabilizer on their Lumix Travelzoom camera. 3 axes of stabilization is implemented in hardware and 2 additional axes is corrected in software, both in the Olympus Stylus and the Panasonic Lumix. And for me, it seems like the Panasonic makes a better overall package. The Olympus Stylus is currently listed at €310. Currently not available yet, so I would expect the price to go down a little bit after it hits the store. Still, in my opinion, the Panasonic offers a better overall package. And now let's take a look at Canon PowerShot SX280HS. Surprisingly, this Canon has only a 12 megapixel sensor. Also, compared to the last generation of Canon Travelzoom cameras, Canon did not extend the zoom range. It still goes from 25mm to 500mm, and the aperture being from 3.5 to 6.8. The last generation of Canon Travelzoom cameras already offered a very good image quality. And Canon did not drastically change the main ingredients of image quality, namely the sensor and the lens. I personally hope that Canon has somehow managed to further optimize the sensor and the lens. Combining with a new image processor, the Digic 6 that got introduced with this SX280, I would expect a further increase in image quality. And thanks to the new processor, Canon has also caught up on functionality. This SX280 offers GPS, full high definition video at 60 frames per second, slow motion video, fully functional manual mode. This camera is currently available for €300. The last camera will be the Fujifilm FinePix F900 EXR. Unlike other Travelzoom cameras, this camera has a slightly larger image sensor. It has 60 megapixel on a 1/2 inch sensor. The zoom goes from 25mm to 500mm, a 20-fold zoom, the aperture being 3.5 to 5.3. This camera is a bit special because it offers the unique EXR modes, in which you can choose between increased light sensitivity, increased dynamic range, or the standard resolution. It also can store image in a RAW format, which is extremely rare for a Travelzoom camera. Also, this camera offers face detection autofocus, which is not found in any other Travelzoom cameras. Currently available at €320, this camera offers a lot of unique features that is not found in any other Travelzoom cameras. And because of a unique image sensor, I do hope that this camera can deliver higher than usual image quality. So that was 8 different Travelzoom cameras from 8 different companies. The Travelzoom cameras is a highly competitive market segment. Therefore, a lot of Travelzoom cameras in the same generation also offers very similar functionality. Personally, I prefer the Canon SX280 or the Fujifilm F900 EXR. The SX280 because I do expect the Canon to have one of the best image qualities out of all of those Travelzoom cameras. The Fujifilm because it offers a lot of unique features that is not found on any other cameras, and it will certainly be a very interesting camera to experiment with. Also, because the Travelzoom cameras have existed for a very long time, the market segment has matured. I do not expect any of those cameras to be truly terrible. I suggest you to take a closer look at the specifications of the camera and pick out the camera that will fit your use pattern the most. So this has been another episode of CharredBrain's Weekly Thoughts. If you like this kind of video where I pick a topic and talk about it, please subscribe to my channel and watch my future videos. Unfortunately, I will have to postpone the video about Dota 2. Instead, in the next video, I will take a look at Minecraft, the game, how it interacts with the player, and how it affects the player. So stay tuned, and until then, goodbye and take care.